Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we have two pistols that came back from World War I. They came back from a really cool part of World War I, or, well, cool, you'll get that in a moment. These came back from the American Expeditionary Force in Siberia. So in the summer, in August of 1918, the US military deployed what would end up being about 8,000 men to Vladivostok, on the far eastern coast of Russian Siberia. Now, the original justification for this was to protect a lot of Allied war material that had been shipped over to Vladivostok for use by the Russians as allies of the French and British and Americans. And of course, with the Russian Revolution and the breakdown in Russian Civil War, those supplies were seen as being substantially at risk. And there was also this matter of the Czech Legion, or the Czechoslovak Legion, of troops who were kind of trapped in Russia. And, well, we should send some guys to help them out and rescue them. And to this end, troops from, in particular, the 27th and the 31st Infantry Divisions were deployed to Vladivostok. And they would stay there for almost 2 years. Now, the initial impetus for deploying them fell apart relatively quickly. Of course, within a few months, the war had ended, but we kept kind of coming up with reasons to keep them there. And they ended up guarding railroads, guarding telegraph and telephone lines, trying sort of not to get involved in the Russian Civil War, but also kind of supporting the white side of the Civil War against the Reds. Ultimately, in April of 1920, US soldiers were finally removed, pulled back out of Vladivostok, and were able to come home. This is, I think, a fascinating little side niche of the First World War that a lot of people don't remember. Who knew that we had American troops deployed to Russia in 1920? But we did. And these two pistols both belonged to guys who were part of that American Expeditionary Force. And we know this, first off, because we have records on them, some records better than others, but the grips on these pistols were carved by a German POW in exchange for tobacco. Let me show you these things, because they're really cool. The first of these pistols, the one that's in a bit nicer condition, was issued to one Lieutenant Dr. George Kent, who was in, well, obviously in the medical services. We have his holster as well, which he has inscribed, Lieutenant George B. Kent, MC, AEF Siberia, and he's copied the serial number of his pistol into the holster. And the grips on this pistol have been carved in what is really a very Germanic style. So we have an American eagle up here, oak leaves and acorns down at the bottom. And then there is a bit of inlaid silver. The sources, the people talking about these typically say that this was probably from silver coins, which may or may not be true, but it would make sense. It's a little difficult to see there, but this has been lettered GBK for our Dr. Lieutenant's initials. And then on the opposite side, we have exactly the same wood carving. And this is really deep, nicely done wood carving. The guy who carved these had some real skill. And then the silver panel on this side says AEF, that's American Expeditionary Force, Siberia, 1919 to 20. Sorry, it's a little hard to get a good reflection there so you guys can see that. But there it is. This is otherwise a totally stock, standard US property marked model of 1911 pistol. Now we know a few things about Dr. Kent. Actually, someone dug up some of the shipping records that show that in 1920 he left on the USS Sheridan, along with, interestingly, a whole bunch of Czechoslovak Legion soldiers, made his way to Italy on that ship, where he then later boarded the USS Logan, where he was listed as a transport surgeon, and returned to the US there late in 1920. The second pistol is, interestingly, you can see it's in much worse condition. This is also an example of what is in collector circles referred to as a Black Army 1911, because in about May of 1918, Colt simplified its finishing, well, its surface finish for 1911 pistols to reduce cost and production time. And what they came up with was this darker black sort of finish that turned out to be really fairly non-durable, fairly fragile. So most of these ended up getting refinished at some point. It's actually a little bit unusual to find one that still has its original finish. This one does, of course, because it was issued to this gentleman, Theodore Joe Matson, who then brought it home before it had any opportunity to be refinished by the Army. So about 325 of these so-called Black Army pistols were made in 1918 and 1919. But getting back to the grips, you can see the exact same style here, obviously done by the same person, the same sort of inlaid trapezoidal diamond-shaped thing there. And this one is fully spelled out Joe Matson. And on the other side, we have AEF Siberia, 1919 to 20. Now, in the records of the 27th and 31st Infantry, who were, by the way, nicknamed the Wolfhounds and the Polar Bears, respectively, as a result of their activities in Russia. At any rate, there is no Joe Matson listed in either of those units. There is, however, a Theodore B. Matson, who was in the 27th Infantry and was in the AEF in Siberia, and I think it requires only a short leap to conclude that Theodore is in fact Joe Matson. Happily, he survived his time in Siberia, survived World War I, and lived until 1955. Looking at these grips side by side, it's really pretty obvious that they were done by the same person. The styling is exactly the same. There were some 15 or 20,000 German POWs in the region of Vladivostok at the time that the US forces were there. In fact, one of the things they ended up doing fairly early on was responding to a concern that the German POWs were going to come and attack and take over the city. Well, it turned out the German POWs were more than happy to turn themselves in to the Americans for some warmth and some good food, as opposed to what they'd been getting from their Russian captors at the time. And the US never had any serious sort of security issue with those POWs. And in fact, we can see that they were interacting with the POWs and exchanging luxury goods like tobacco for engraved pistol grips. Now, it would be one thing if we only had 2 of these, but we have several more. Not personally here to show you, but this is sort of a known thing in the collecting community. This anonymous German POW has gotten himself remembered through his work. So I know these photographs are dark to begin with, and I don't think they come through all that well on camera, but they're the documentation I have here, the best I've got for you. This belongs to, or did a number of years ago, a collector up in Oregon, and you can see this one is AWC initials, and this one is actually marked Vladivostok instead of Siberia. So there's another example. If we take a look in the World War I Collector's Handbook by Hayes Otopolik, you will find another example here. And this one is marked Vladivostok, Siberia, 1920. This is a little dark and probably doesn't translate all that well to the camera there, but you can see that it's the same eagle on top and leaves and acorns on the bottom. And then I have found references, although I don't have good photos that I could show you, and I obviously don't have the pistols here in front of me, good references on at least 3 more of them. And that takes this well out of the realm of one-off potential fake or fraud to my mind. And because these pistols are all spread across the country, unrelated to each other, to me, by far the simplest and most likely explanation is that there was, in fact, a German POW who was a pretty darn good wood and metal carver up in Vladivostok, plying his trade for chewing tobacco or cigarettes from American doughboys. Normally it would be really a pretty cool thing to find just one of these, much less 2 of them, but here in this case we have a really kind of almost unprecedented half a dozen or more known examples. It's really a shame that we'll never know, I'm sure, anything about the German POW who actually did this work. But it's really cool that his work does survive, and we see these examples all individually carved for different US soldiers. So if you have one of these, perhaps now you can identify it, and I'd love to see pictures of it. Send me an email at admin@forgottenweapons.com. It'd be really cool to put together a page showing all the different known examples and how the style is all the same, but they're all just slightly different and individualized, and of course named to the soldiers who had the pistols. Now, hopefully, even if you don't have one of these, you enjoyed watching the video. Thanks.